All right, you guys look great. Welcome everyone. And I just want to honor Matt's profile here. He wanted to clarify that this is actually Jim LaPlant. That is not Matt on his computer. So very excited for this session. I'm going to go ahead and let all of you go ahead and take over, but just want to let you know that you sound great and you look great.
Well, thank you so much, Advocacy. I'll go ahead and kick off. My name is VanDyke. I'm the current president of the Association of Regional Water Organizations, and we're excited that you all have joined us for day 2 of the ARRO conference. I'm hoping that this session will be very interactive, and I'm certain that it's going to fly by. So we're going to get right to it. But just a little housekeeping details. Glenn did mention this morning during his presentation about the state of the world right now in 2021. And he did mention Iowa Lakes Regional Water and Randy VanDyke. I just share with you at 8 o'clock, we had our typical 7-minute briefing that we usually have with all of our operators. We don't ask them to come into the office. We just do it by conference call. And we usually have anywhere from 12 to 16 on the call. Supportive crew, as well as our water and wastewater operators. And then we send them out to the hitherlands, since we cover about 10,000 square miles in our service territory. We are one of the smaller members of ARRO in terms of population served, about 15 to 17,000. But we probably constitute one of the largest geographic areas, covering a little over 10,000 square miles. So we get these guys out and about in a hurry. Our construction division, we've got 6 or 8 crews going right now, and they're all masked whenever they're engaging with the public or with themselves operating in their vehicles as well. Kelly Grappler, our deputy CEO for Iowa Lakes Regional Water, took the floor this morning and announced we had 7 cases and possibly 9 where we either had staff or a staff member with a direct family member in the nuclear family that were positive and at some level of quarantine. And I'm one of those with my mother. She is recovering after my youngest daughter is a physician and came in 10 days ago into our home to do a home doctor call. And following that, we had called in hospice because we were pretty sure that my 98-year-old mother was not going to survive. And I'm happy to announce that she's just doing great. I have my middle daughter has had COVID twice, a month apart, and my oldest daughter is what they call a long hauler, and she's had COVID for something, she's over it now, but for something like 6 months continuously during that time. Just a crazy time, absolutely crazy time. I just wanted to mention something before we get into this. It brings back the 1980 farm crisis in the Midwest. And during that time, suicides were up, and the USDA Farmers Home Administration had mental counseling available for all their staff because of the farm loans that had gone delinquent. And now we have the elderly that are sheltered in all of the facilities. One thing that we're looking at at Iowa Lakes Regional Water is having mental health specialists available for consultation with our staff and our families. And I truly believe that that's a good move, and it's a necessary move as we move into 2021. This, as Glenn mentioned, it's not going to go away fast. I got a kick out of watching the television well into the evening last night when SpaceX and the Falcon docked with the Space Lab. I think it was live, but I kind of got a kick out of it. They're going into a 6-month mission, folks. And, I got to thinking how lucky they are because when they return, there likely might be a vaccine that they'll be able to utilize. So that's kind of fascinating. I'm going to go ahead and let my 2 colleagues introduce themselves, and we'll launch. But just give you an idea of what you can expect. What we're hoping to do is to share some of our experiences both pre-COVID, and then we'll give you some suggestions post-COVID into 2021 of what to do, and our strengths in terms of our organization and the vision for the future. This session is specifically looking at, why is lobbying important to the industry, and how can we really do that in terms of advocacy, the lobbying, and the legislative activities, not only in our state houses, but also in Washington, D.C. So we will kick off here by letting Mr. Jim LaPlant introduce himself, and Jim's going to share some ideas and some things that he has to, and then we'll have Hector move into it. I would like to suggest, if anybody has any questions, don't hold them to the end. Please move those questions along, and with Asterix assistance and so forth, I'll make sure that we spin those questions up to Jim and Hector and try to address them as we go. So without further ado, we'll launch and turn it over to Mr. Jim LaPlant.
Can you hear me, Randy?
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you, Randy. I'm Jim LaPlant, and I'm the former CEO, current administrative advisor for Iowa Regional Utilities Association. Iowa Regional Utilities is a larger regional system headquartered in Newton, Iowa, serves central and northern Iowa, approximately 15,000 customers, 5,000 miles of pipeline. Over 70 of our customers are small communities that we have partnered with and provide service to. And there are somewhere north of 200 million invested in our system so far. I was fortunate enough, I was hired by IRUA shortly after I received my engineering license in the late 1970s. So I've been involved in this organization from inception for over 40 years. And when I was hired as a CEO engineer, one of the first things I did, rather than rely on consultants, was put together an in-house engineering team for in-house engineering. Shortly thereafter, put together a construction division. So we've been fortunate in being able to design and build our own facilities. Fortunately, USDA RD had a program for owner construction that fit our model perfectly. And so it's a unique situation to be able to design, build, and then operate your own facilities. I determined early on that we had a need for representation in government affairs. And the three primary areas that come to mind are, first of all, funding and financing. It's a growing system. You need the pecuniary resources to build. So obviously the USDA Water and Wastewater Loan and Grant Program was essential to us. So funding, regulatory, we need to treat and distribute water that's affordable for our customers. In order to do that, there has to be some logical relationship between regulation and affordability of service. And lastly, territory protection. Iowa is a state where, because of farm consolidation, and I'm kind of a part-time farmer, I'm responsible for this myself, but there's an ongoing migration of rural to urban in Iowa, and it affects our customer base. And for example, many of the old farmsteads are being destroyed as farms become larger by consolidation. And the principles are kind of the same as why regionalization makes sense in the water industry. So in the mid-'80s, I met with 6 regional managers in Iowa. Our mission was to decide whether to form a new organization to represent us in these areas, or to join what was then a weak state association. And I think we called ourselves a non-member Iowa Rural Water Association at the time. But because of the state association's affiliation with National Rural Water, it made more sense to join them and try to improve the organization. So we did that. and that launched about a 26-year career for me as an officer in Iowa Rural Water Association. And I would find myself on an airplane headed to Washington, D.C. for the National Rural Water Rally. And I had my suit in my suitcase, but I didn't have much else with me. And determined, hey, we have a need to improve the message that we convey to Congress and to the government agencies, and to educate them on why water is important, why they need to recognize what we're asking for, and basically educate them in the water industry, along with our ask for national rural water. National rural water at the time was basically the USDA funding, as well as the appropriations for the circuit riders. So I used our in-house engineering department, and by that time we had some graphic design people, to put materials together to take to Washington, D.C., and kind of walk that fine line between having too much material and overwhelming them with information that would end up in the circular file, but having concise information to share that would educate them on what regional water was all about. So an example might be a map that would depict a congressional district, and superimposed on that map would be the territories of the regional systems in that congressman's district. In the case of a senator, it would be, of course, the whole state. We would try to show projects that were in the hopper or ready to be funded, present all kinds of information as concisely as we could. Now, I'm a big fan of maps, so our maps were 24 by 36, and they were very legible, and they would be used kind of as a placemat for the entire presentation. But I think we were able to consolidate our materials and do a good job in deciding what was appropriate, and when we crossed the line and we had too much with us. In terms of relationships with Congress and with the agencies, I'll give you an example. Senator Grassley is a long-term senator from Iowa. You may have heard his name recently. He's on the Judicial Committee, and he's been involved in the recent Supreme Court nomination process. And Senator Grassley is a customer of IRUA, so that is an automatic in terms of relationship building. But early, several years ago, Randy VanDyke discovers he's a runner. So Randy recruits me to run with himself and the senator on our trips to DC. And you have to understand that running with Senator Grassley involves a 3:15 a.m. wake-up call at your hotel. You're at the senator's house by taxi about 4:05 to 4:10, and a 3-mile run with the senator at 4:15, starting at 4:15. Many times breakfast with the senator and his wife, Barbara, after the run. And then usually I would take the metro back to the mall. I was an animal at the time and would put in another 5 or 6 miles on the mall. Get back at the hotel at 6:30 in the morning, and I thought I had a full day in, and I had a full day to go, and a late plane ride home. So, but what I gained from that was that one-on-one time with the senator was the greatest relationship building I can imagine. And Randy, I've always wanted to thank you for that experience so much, and I will think of a way to thank you at some point in time here. As far as relationships with staffers, I believe they're also very important. I again I do a lot of things, so I usually have something in common with everyone. And I like to pick or build a personal relationship, because many times the relationships with the staffers are more important than the actual legislators themselves. So I run the mall many times with staffers. Usually they're into exercise out there, they're younger folks, and you just find some way to be on a personal, some level of a personal relationship with staffers, and that's been very effective. Now, bringing this experience to Aero, what I've noticed is I've got all these organizations that are first class that have done the same things. And the leadership of Arrow has been extraordinary. We start off with Randy VanDyke as president, and Randy's experience with National Rural Water and his as president of National Rural Water, and the contacts that he's made have opened doors that that I'm just amazed. We follow that with Bill Teichmiller, and holy smokes, he's his contacts and his personality and the professionalism of his organization is outstanding. Let me go back to Randy. He's a little shy, but we're trying to work him out of his shell. And so he's getting up there in Bill's category. I know we're going to shortly, in a short time, follow that with Glenn Marsluff. And again, we've got 3 top professionals that are well connected. And I think that kind of, I'll call it a grassroots approach is a key to Arrow's legislative initiatives. And then again, we're able to use the professional staffs of the Arrow members to put together our legislative materials. And as a matter of fact, in March, prior to COVID, we were all set to go out to DC to promote our 2 major initiatives, the demonstration program, which for the first time will actually allocate some funding for regional projects at the poverty interest rate, about $12.5 million. And it will also involve the underwriting of USDA loans at utilizing the MHI of the project area versus the MHI of the entire regional system plus the project area. So excited about that. Our pilot project, a 8-state pilot project water study is very similar to an initiative we did in the late 90s for Iowa Rural Water, but it basically is an assessment of who has the water and what quantity do they have, who needs the water and what quantity do they need, and how can we best regionalize and partner to take advantage of economy of scale, regionalization, and make the most effective use of the limited federal dollar resources that we have. Over the past 5 years, I've been to 4 or 5 seminars, workshops on regionalization and partnerships, mergers, consolidations. And what I've noticed is we talk about it a lot, and we get the buy-in of the lenders, and we get the buy-in of the regulatory folks, and they've been great meetings in terms of identifying best practices and how could we do this. But the legislative initiatives proposed by Arrow are a solution for regional systems on how this is going to be accomplished. So I'm very proud of those initiatives, and very excited that Arrow has embraced them and is moving them forward in their legislative program. So with that, Randy, I think I'll turn it back to you. And again, thank you for those early morning runs in DC.
All right. Okay, Hector, can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you.
Thank you. Jim, I remember when our freshman senator came in, Senator Ernst, and we asked if she wanted to join us on one of the runs, and she immediately accepted the invitation. And I suggested to her that it might be a little bit early at 4:15, and she turned and looked at me and she says, I'm a lieutenant colonel in the active in the military, and I spent 6 months in the desert sleeping in a tent. I believe I can get up at 4:15 and run with a senior senator from Iowa. So, so it was exciting to see that, Jim, when we do get back to Washington, D.C., we had an ice day that day and we had to cancel our run. But every time I see the senator, she talks about the fact that she's still on a rain check and wants an invitation for you and I to take her running with the senator. And now that she's won her election, we're probably going to be committed to do that one more time. So that's just it's about building those relationships. That's for sure. Mr. Gonzalez, just tell us all of the spectacular things that you just take for granted that you all do at El Paso. with that rich staff that you have that able to accomplish these initiatives. And it's just intriguing when I listen to all that you have going on. Take it away.
Thank you, Randy. Good morning to you and everyone else. My name is Hector Gonzalez. I'm the Government Affairs Manager for El Paso Water. We're located in El Paso, Texas, just quite a ways from where the majority of the group, I would say, is located in the Midwest or so. And I'll later briefly mention how I got involved with this group. But by way of background, I can maybe talk a little bit about the utility here in El Paso. For those that are not familiar with El Paso, we're located along the border. Most recent, I'm sure you've seen some of the bad news that we've encountered because of the COVID, along with many other cities. But we're located just adjacent to Mexico and New Mexico, and that poses some challenges and opportunities in terms of water resources because we are faced with having to manage our groundwater and we take water from the same aquifers or the same bolsons that Mexico takes their water from and New Mexico takes their water from, and yet each area, we say we're governed by 3 states or located within a 3-state and 2-country jurisdiction, and each area and each country has different laws and regulations in terms of how water is managed, at least groundwater and surface water is managed. And so that poses some pretty significant challenges, and we also see them as opportunities for how we're able to manage water. Paso Water, we provide water, wastewater, reclaimed water, and stormwater to the city and citizens of El Paso, as well as to, we have a number of wholesale and a few retail accounts located outside the city in areas that we call colonias or unincorporated areas that are located outside the city, but yet within the county of El Paso. And just a short story in terms of how I came to the utility. Historically, anyone that was located outside the city and wanted service, you were basically left on your own and had to defend for yourself. As a result, a number, from what I recall, as many as about 14 small water utilities or water districts were created at the time. And so the board, once upon a time, decided to change that and make the decision that it was going to use its best efforts to try to extend service to these outlying areas, which is how I actually coincidentally came to be. I had approached the general manager. I was working in California, approached the general manager at the time about returning back to El Paso, my home town. I'm born and raised here. And he indicated, well, the board just approved this policy that we are going to make our best efforts to extend service outside the city, whatever that means, without any specific guidance, I guess, other than try to assess the situation, and ultimately the ultimate goal was to extend service to these outlying areas. And so long story short, 4.5 years later, I had a number of engineers and administrative staff, and we were managing about $100 million in projects, all located outside the city in terms of just water at this time. And several of these 14 outlying districts folded and were basically put out of business. But one of the things that we did at that time was we worked with the state. In Texas, we've got what is known as the Texas Water Development Board. It's a state agency that oversees planning and provides funding, and some works with the regulatory agencies in issues related to water and wastewater. And so we worked with this agency, and what the agency did at the time was agree to provide funding to these outlying communities with the condition that El Paso Water, which was the largest and still is the largest utility in the region, was able to provide oversight and manage the planning, design, and construction of these water projects. And so it turned out to be a win-win for everyone. The utility was able to ultimately have these new customers be a part of their customer base. The customers were able to receive the service, and the outlying small water districts were either put out of business or were provided wholesale water. And one of our current RWO members is still to this day our largest customer, one of our largest customers, that ultimately provides retail service to some of these outlying areas. So in terms of regionalization, we've got a long history of being involved in extending and service and working with some of these outlying communities. 25, 28 years later, I still am involved in dealing with some of these customers that to this day, I still get calls about the questions they may have about their something as simple as their water bill, to who can they call for extending service to an adjoining property or things of that sort. It's been a good relationship that we continue to work with the state and the regulatory agencies. But in terms of relationships and how we interact with not only the state but the federal level, it's worth noting we continue to monitor and be very involved in water issues at the state level. We do have a lobbyist that's located in Austin, Texas, that I interact with. My job is to oversee the work that both the state and federal lobbyists that we have and the work that they do. We also have a person that works for me that is involved just on the local level in dealing with city council and mayor. But at the state and federal level, we have a lobbying team in Austin as well as one in Washington. Our legislature in Texas only meets every other year, and budgets the state budget is approved biannually. And so we've got a year where things are kind of slow, but we take advantage of that to work on our state agenda and then look forward to a legislative year, which will be coming up here in 2021, at which time the legislature then meets from January through about May. And so it's a pretty busy time in Austin in just monitoring, providing testimony at times. I've been involved in providing testimony a number of times to the state committees and before the state legislature on issues that are state regulatory or funding issues, all related to water. And then on the federal side, I'm most involved with, we have a lobbying team there in Washington that I interact with sometimes on a daily basis, sometimes on a weekly basis, and sometimes every other week or so. But there's still quite a bit of close communication with the lobbying team that we have in Washington, D.C. The areas that we focus on at least the federal level include legislative, regulatory, and funding issues. At the state level, we're pretty much told we'll be glad to talk about the legislative and the regulatory, but as can be expected, funds are always tight, and so as long as the conversation isn't too focused on the need for additional monies at the state level, we have a great deal of interaction with legislators on legislative and regulatory issues. At the federal level, going back to the federal level, we're involved on all three: legislative, monitoring and looking at what laws are being introduced that could have an impact on our ratepayers. Sometimes it's a positive impact, sometimes it's a negative impact, and we get very involved in either writing letters, working with our delegation to ensure that this legislation really doesn't result in a negative impact to our ratepayers. On the regulatory side, pretty much the same thing: monitoring legislation that could be introduced, and this coming year, if we have a new administration, I think that's going to be no exception. We can, from what we hear, we can expect some more regulatory laws being introduced that could have an impact on our again our ratepayers and their ability to be able to the utility's ability to be able to ensure that we're able to comply with these regulations. And then on the funding, which is a topic that many people like to hear about, is how it is that we have any success. I attend a number, at least last year and the years past, attend a number of trade organizations and all related to water, and inevitably run into people that the question comes up, well, have you had any luck in getting any funding for your utility? And we've been very lucky, and as our former president would say, it's either good planning or dumb luck, maybe a little of both at times, but it's a lot of work, really, is really more than anything what it entails. And because of that, we've had a pretty good track record of being able to secure several million. I would say we're averaging $4 to $5 million in grant funds a year. There's been years, just a year and a half ago or so, I think we got close to 18 million or so altogether. But that was by no means was that the normal. That was an exception, but we were able to get quite a bit of funding from the state, which again doesn't come very often. But so we spend a lot of time, or should I say, I spend a lot of time. I did as many. I counted in 2019. I did 33 trips to a number of places, both at the state as well as national level, and that would include not only attending again conferences and work groups and a lot of discussions, all with the goal of creating new relationships and being in close contact with many people. We stay in close contact with our delegation as well as members and staff of our legislators. And I also interact quite a bit with the various federal agencies. When I talk about El Paso's been lucky to get funding from a number of federal agencies, that includes Department of Defense, the Bureau of Reclamation, EPA, USDA, just a number of different organizations in the past that the utility has been worked very hard to seek some of this funding. And as Jim mentioned, we also, just by way of example, and what we do is we prepare materials. I interact with our lobbyists, like I said, in terms of defining a strategy. At the beginning of the year, we put together a state agenda and a federal agenda, and then we closely monitor that agenda to ensure that we're able to, throughout the year, meet with the appropriate people and present our issues. And the squeaky wheel does get is the attention. And so it's a matter of being there. I can tell you that there are times that some of these federal agencies, I've met with them 3, 4, 5 times in 1 year, which is takes a toll, not only in terms of the time that's invested, but it is a considerable expense that the utility does spend on these efforts. But I can tell you that so far, those efforts pay for themselves and then some. We've been successful at getting as much as 75% in grant, 90% in grant for some of these projects. And all of this translates into savings for our ratepayers. We have as much as $100 million in capital improvement program here at the utility, and yet we're fortunate enough to say we still have some of the lowest water and wastewater rates in the state of Texas. And I think in large part of that is because of the efficiencies that we have, some of the funding, grant funding that we're able to obtain also contributes to that. So with that, I think maybe I'll just turn it over to you, Randy, and then leave some time for some questions. I think I forgot the last thing I probably want to mention that is also a key to our utility success is in terms of governance, that we have a separate board independent from the city. And so the mayor sits on that board, and all the decisions to approve budget and projects and so forth are approved by our board. And then innovation, the utility is also very big in looking at innovative technologies and innovative projects. We've got the largest inland desalination plant in the world. We're now in the design, we're almost finishing up the design for what will be taking water from our wastewater plant and putting that through treatment process that will ultimately take it to drinking water standards in a plant of about 10 million gallons a day. So we also have a number of innovative projects, and I think that being ahead of that always gets the attention of many of the federal, state and federal agencies to want to know how things are being done and some of the cutting edge technologies that are being used. And that all leads to, again, creating relationships and maintaining those relationships and the lobbying efforts that we are involved with. So.
Well, thank you so much, Hector. Congratulations also. First of all, thank you for the 2 years of service as vice president of Aero. And now congratulations on being elected a senior vice president. The bylaws give you one very important job, and that's to be the ambassador for the organization, along with our new president, Glenn Marsloff. And also joining, and then of course, Tyke Miller and I, were as immediate past presidents, will be as the has-beens, we'll still be the ambassadors, and we intend to be involved with the organization for many, many years to come. But welcome also to our friend from Central Arkansas, who was elected vice president, and our newest ambassador that's in the leadership role there, Tad Bohannon. And Tad, thank you very much for your willingness to accept that nomination and get elected. So with Tad as vice president, Hector as senior vice president, Glenn as president, we've got great leadership. You're absolutely right, Jim. The organization is in a very, very strong position. We got a chance to meet Hector when Bill and I were running around Washington, D.C. And all over the country. Bill continued to pester us from about 2010 to about 2015 about this idea that there's a need out there. So we really want, there was a particular itch that needed to be scratched in terms of a new trade organization. And of course, that's who Aero has become. And during the 2015 year, we were invited to participate with conferences and welcomed open arms to the Association of Metropolitan Water Agency that El Paso had been a member of for many, many decades. And the long story short, Diane VanDyke, the executive director, welcomed us and took care of our giving us an office and a home to begin our organization, and actually served as acting executive director before Jim Morris was retiring from the federal government and could take the helm in that role. So many, many thanks to the Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies. And to mention just a few other huge partners is AWWA. They've always been great supporters with the ideas of the regional concept and what can happen in terms of their membership as well. And many of those friends that are on the water utility councils are very good friends of mine, since I served on that for about 8 years as well. So the Water Utility Council and AWWA and the staff, Dr. Meehan from Tracy Meehan in Washington, D.C., is great supporters of our organization, great collaborators. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Adam Krantz with the National Association of Clean Water Agency. Immediately, Adam realized the importance of our organization and the fact that we're looking at what can we do to take care of the underserved or unserved areas in terms of the water and wastewater needs across the nation. And that sparked their interest. So we have cross membership with AMWA. We have got cross membership with our organization with NACWA as well, and AWWA, and continue. Almost all of us are members of AWWA. And then, of course, later on this afternoon, you'll get to hear from Nathan Olney, and a great partner we have with the National RCAP, the National Community Assistance Program. So we'll hear about that a little bit later on. But that's just a few. And here's a piece of work that we did this year. And if you can see that, you'll notice that that this particular document was what we were able to work on in terms of urgent funding and policy considerations. And this is Sustainable Solutions for America Water and Wastewater Infrastructure. There was 16 entities that participated in that, and we were awfully glad to be a part of that. I want to just take the last few minutes and give you something for a takeaway. If you're looking at lobbying, whether you're doing it at the national level or at the state house, first and foremost, know your subject. Make absolutely sure that you're well informed and you do your research. It's easy to walk in and have conversations with those folks. They're your friends, they're your neighbors, and they've thrown their hat in the ring to be elected. And they need your support, and they need your help, and they need the knowledge that you have. So try to be informed, and always consider yourself to be proactive rather than reactive. In any legislative activity that we're looking at, lobbying and advocacy, a proactive role is always preferred to be to a reactive role. And relationships back home. Jim was talking about the fact that Senator Grassley is on his water system. Find something of commonality. Understand who those elected people are, what their interests are, and what they do. Secretary of Agriculture right now is a veterinarian. He's a pilot. He's a foster parent. Those are very important aspects. We should know that all the way from administrative level in the White House, all the way down to the representatives and the senators of your state house. Know who your audience is and find those legislative relationships and build on those. Build coalitions, much like the 16 that we built in this particular document, and make sure that you utilize those collaborations and those coalitions. And because it brings positive strength to your arguments, it substantiates what you say and what you're doing, and it really brings broad relevancy as well. And the legislators have a lot of constituents. So by bringing in these other organizations, it really addresses their broad array of constituents that they're looking at. As Jim was talking about, good information that you bring is important. But there's always two things that we always talk about is tell and ask. Tell your story. Relate it to anything back home that is relevant. And then leave an ask. Try to get a commitment if you can when you're visiting with those legislatures. If they're not prepared to get a commitment, then set up a follow-up meeting where you can provide more information. Find out what they need to know and what their problem is in terms of where they're at. Yesterday, we heard from the panelists about find out where that root canal is. Sometimes we need to know from the legislatures not only what their interests are, but where they're having problems. And if they're having an issue where they can't support your initiatives, it's because they've got some other issue in terms of their constituency that causes them a root canal. Can you help them solve that problem? And as Tyke Miller always said, is that regional water systems are all about economic development, fiber to the homes, all type of different things. LaPlant and I were involved with a rural community development initiative where we actually were involved in a housing initiative for these systems that we have put wastewater systems in communities. Jim was talking about almost 30 wastewater communities that he's working with. We've got over 12 right now. Sustaining those communities right now is fiber to the homes and new homes. So Jim worked on home rehabilitation project, and I worked on the initiatives to bring in new housing into those communities. Tyke Miller is working on fiber to the homes. You need to be involved in all of the aspects to solving those problems for those legislatures, as well as the economic development for within your footprint that you're influenced by your water system. It's not just a one-stop shop. We just can't look at regionalization as a one-trick pony. We have to be everything and look at whether we can be everything or not. Finishing with an example of that, we had a lot of folks that said, you ought to be looking at alternative energy for solar or wind for all of your facilities. We have something like 35 to 40 different facilities, pumping stations, towers, treatment plants, etc. So we thought, well, that we need to take a look at that. So we didn't really have a very strong organization. Jim was saying, you roll up your sleeve, you get involved with the associations you have, or you start new associations like Arrow. And we formed the Iowa Wind Energy Association. what happened during that time, and I enjoyed serving as president of that, is you provided another level of involving yourself with other folks that have like interests in terms of economic development. Because you see in Iowa, it's not only corn and beans that provide renewable energies, but it's also exporting wind. And we produce enough wind right now to take care of 100% of all the needs in Iowa, and then we can actually transport that energy all the way to the East Coast right now. So I'm going to stop right there and just wrap up by the 35 years of drawing the short straw and going to Washington, D.C. as the representative from Iowa Rural Water and learning what to do. Is what I understand is that the branding that Arrow has right now in championing the underserved and unserved and economic development resonates well, not only in the State House, but also nationally as well. Tell your story, be clear, distinct, and have your objectives, and have a simple ask, not 14 or 15 different things that you want, just one simple ask. Involve a broader group of advocacies, association members as well, and know your weaknesses. Know your weaknesses, and I can get into that a little bit more, but we've got some questions and answers, don't we, Astrid? So.
Yes, we do. We have 3 questions, and we should probably try to answer them in the next 4 minutes if we can.
Okay.
Coming up close to the next session, but the first one is specifically for Hector. Who are the primary agencies you obtain funding for sourcing water projects?
Well, as I mentioned, because of our location here, we've got a military base here. So one of the agencies that we've been dealing with lately, and not to mention we've got our desal plant is located on the base, but Department of Defense would be one agency. The Corps of Engineers is another agency. Bureau of Reclamation, EPA helped fund a large part of our desal plant back in 2007. So it's basically any and all agencies that are involved in water-related issues.
Thank you. And the next one is for Jim and Randy. In the last few years, have you received any grant funds from USDA or WIC?
Right. I'll answer this quickly and turn it over to Jim and let him go ahead and wrap up. Iowa Lakes Regional Water has about $100 to $110 million portfolio. Of that, we probably have received about 30% in grant funds and 70% loan funds. This year, we've got $15 million of projects that have received obligations of funds. And of those, the average is about 40% grant and 60% loan on those $15 million. Go ahead, Jim.
We haven't received any USDA financing for quite a few years. We've got a couple of projects in the hopper. I'd say our history is similar to yours, Randy, but we haven't received any grants recently.
Wonderful. Thank you, guys. And the last one is for all of you. It says, what % of your overall effort for funding is spent at state level versus nationally? And same question, but for legislator matters, state versus national.
Is that % in time or % in funding? I can tell you, I can comment at least on the effort. So we've got about 3 individuals, one handling local, myself handling state and federal, and then another person that provides some oversight of both the local and state. So we have 3 individuals that work on, again, everything from local, state, federal, and includes legislative, regulatory, and funding related issues.
Right. And from Iowa's point of view, we've got 5 Arrow members in Iowa, and Jim and I try to take point on our lobbyists that we have for the 5 members of Arrow at the State House. We work mostly on policy issues, but we're going to be looking at some very specific funding at the 89th session of the Iowa Legislature. So we intend to move forward on that. it's absolutely essential to look at the synergy between what happens at the state house and what happens at the federal government. The success of one is inseparably linked by the success of the other.
I might point out that any potential, either current members or potential members that want to know more about some of the things that we do, feel free to reach out to us. We can tell you more about our individual efforts or what the organization as a whole has done in the past, if anyone has any other questions.
Absolutely. And we ran out of time to get into post-COVID for 2021. But for next year, it's, what are we going to be doing by virtual and by phone, state and nationally? Understanding how those offices want to work, engaging with those offices the way that their bosses want them to engage with the staff first, find out what those bosses, how they want to engage with you, and then how the next follow-up meeting should take place. And making sure that we're collaborating not only with the lobbyists that we have for Arrow at your state house, but also at the national level, and our activities in our headquarters in the Willard on Pennsylvania between the White House and Capitol Hill. Azric, back to you.
All right. Thank you guys so much for such a great session. A reminder to everyone that in 9 minutes, we have our next one that's going to be Brent Fuel. So we're super excited for that one on a political update from him. So get a short break, grab a drink, go to the bathroom, whatever you need to do, and then we'll see you here in 9 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.